Pokémon games are infamous for being very repetitive and easy, but I think some of those issues come from the way we play them. With Scarlet Violet releasing tomorrow, we have another chance of experiencing the world of Pokémon, but this time trying to avoid those issues. So for today, I bring you guys a couple of tips that can help you avoid burnout and improve the experience quite a bit. Hey guys, it's Adam, let's get started. So tip number 1, don't use the same Pokémon in multiple games. I think the most exciting part of the franchise is finding new Pokémon, training them, and seeing them evolve into their final forms. However, I don't really feel the same excitement when I catch Pokémon that I already had in a previous game. I've battled with it, I've seen its moves, I've seen its evolution line, it's time for something new. In my opinion, if you use a Pokémon that you already have, you're just making the game more repetitive for yourself. So the idea is, once you have a Pokémon on your team in a game, that little guy is banned from all other games you play in the future, at least until you finish the main story. With just over 900 Pokémon already in existence, you should always be able to find one you haven't had on your team before. But even if you're a hardcore fan and you have already used every single one of them already, with Generation 9 right around the corner, you could still use tip number 2, focus on new Pokémon. What better way to feel like a child again than looking for and finding new Pokémon just like you did when you first experienced the Kanto region back in Generation 1. With Scarlet and Violet, we should get around 80 to 150 Pokémon that we haven't seen before. We don't know their evolution line, what moves they learn, or how strong they are in combat. It's a great opportunity to put our old friends on the sidelines and have some fun with the new guys. Now obviously this tip is kinda useless if you don't also follow tip number 3, avoid leaks. You probably have watched series like The Mandalorian or The House of Dragons and made extra care when browsing the internet to avoid spoilers. You might have even stopped looking at social media altogether, as you want to get the best experience from watching the show itself. You don't want to know what happens in the next scene, you want to see the story unfold in front of your eyes. That's way more exciting, isn't it? So why not do the same with video games? And no, I don't just mean avoiding story spoilers. You are probably already doing that. I mean avoiding general data mining leaks as well, like information about the upcoming Pokémon. Let them be a mystery. I mean sure, I like choosing my starter Pokémon based on its final evolution as well, which I believe makes sense because you cannot change your starter later on if it turns out that you don't like it, but checking those out is only a small portion of the Pokédex. Even if you do that, you should still have at least 60 Pokémon that you can be excited about. And to be honest, for Scarlet and Violet, I might even keep the starter as a mystery as well. Tip number 4, don't hunt for shinies. Like most people, I like shinies as well, but what makes shinies so cool in my opinion is not just that they look different from their original counterparts, but also how rare they are. Intentional hunting them actually reduces their value in my eyes and also turns the game into a pointless grind. To be fair, after you finish every quest and complete the Pokédex, there is not much else to do, and if you feel like hunting for some shinies, by all means go for it. But if you want to avoid burnout, I recommend against it. Tip number 5. Don't complete the National Dex. On the topic of burning out from pointless grind, collecting hundreds of Pokémon that you already have is very sad. I think it's completely pointless, and honestly, I don't think it should even be a feature. I think the game should be considered finished once you've done every quest and completed the regional Dex. Actually, that in itself already includes collecting a bunch of Pokémon we used from previous games, and I don't see a reason why you should increase the number of them. If you have nothing else to do, sure, go ahead. But I think there are plenty of other great video games to play instead. Tip number 6. Forget about EVs and IVs. Having the absolute perfect version of each Pokémon should be kept for professional tournaments in my opinion. For having fun playing through the game, you should just forget that these tests even exist. In fact, I don't think you should care about natures either, and if you don't know what any of these terms even mean, perfect. Ignorance is bliss. Tip number 7. You don't need a perfectly diverse team. I'm pretty sure everyone who knows even a little bit about type matchups will try to diversify their team, so they can always switch to the Pokémon with better odds against whatever they're fighting at the moment. But if one of your biggest issues with the game is the lack of difficulty, maybe try not focusing on having the perfect answer to every opponent. Choose Pokémon based on which one you like more, which one looks the coolest, or which one you haven't used before. And if that means having more than just one fire Pokémon in your team, go for it. You should have some type variety in your team, but having 6 different types every time is unnecessary. Tip number 8. Let your Pokémon rest and avoid overleveling. If you have played games like Darkest Dungeon or the XCOM series, you might be familiar with their recovery system. Essentially, if a unit gets injured in battle, they need some time to recover, which depends on how much damage they suffered. Pokémon games don't really have this sort of system. Instead, we have Pokémon centers where you just go in and have your buddies return to max health. The game itself does not give you any incentive to change Pokémons frequently, but I think you should do for multiple reasons. First of all, it results in a more realistic experience. We see Pokémon get tired and in need of a rest quite frequently in the anime, but there is nothing of that sort in the game. Second, it helps keep your Pokémon from being overleveled, which I think is one of the biggest reasons why the games are so easy. And third, it will help improve the variety of the game. Repetitiveness being a big issue, if you change your team quite frequently, you can improve the experience for yourself a bit. So next time you are playing, if you revive a Pokémon 3 times in a single battle, consider putting him in a box to rest. Also, if one of your team members starts to outlevel the others, putting him in a box can help the rest of the team to catch up. Tip number 9, limit consumables you carry. Having 54 restores in your bag essentially turns your Pokémon invincible. Next time you play, try restricting the amount you carry. Maybe limit yourself to just 5 healing items and 5 condition curing items. Trainers and gym leaders have about 1 to 3 potions, so this will also improve fairness in combat and increase the challenge quite a bit. You can of course play with the numbers to adjust the difficulty to your liking, but the point is to not have a lifeline in every single situation. Tip number 10, limit usage of super effective moves. My biggest issue with gameplay in general is the length of combat. More often than not, the animation of starting and ending the battle actually takes longer than the battle itself. The combat pretty much comes down to just whoever uses a super effective move first, as their damage is just insane. It's somewhat rare to see a fight last more than 2 or 3 turns outside of gyms, and even then, the first turn is usually about switching out your Pokémon. Now don't get me wrong, I do really like that we do have a type matchup system, and we do have super effective and weak moves, but I just think that their damage is outrageous. Dealing 2 times or even 4 times damage, it doesn't matter how much health a Pokémon has or how low their base damage is. With such a high multiplayer, you can pretty much one-shot every enemy. Obviously, we can't really change the rules of the game itself, but we can change the way we play it. So if you're looking for a bit of a challenge, try not using super effective moves or at least just limiting the amount of you use. For fairness, you could also switch to a Pokémon that both you and your opponent deal 1 times damage to each other. Tip number 11, limit the number of attack abilities. Having 4 attack abilities on a single Pokémon essentially disables the PowerPoint system. If you run out of PP for Flamethrower, just use Flame Wheel instead. And if you run out of that as well, just use Ember. Sure, they are not equally powerful moves, but a Grass Ice Pokémon won't really care either way. So the way I do it is this. For single type monsters, I use 1 regular attack with mediocre damage and a reasonable amount of PP, and 1 ultimate ability with a very high damage but with low PP. For multi-type Pokémon, have 1 attack for each of its types, and I suggest using generic moves here, but you could include an ultimate if you want. For your third option, I suggest using a special or hybrid ability that may or may not do some damage, but generally has some sort of special effect, like applies poison, life steal, or quick attack. And for your last, have 1 non-damaging ability, either something that affects stats or status conditions. Now you might think that improving stats or affecting status conditions are irrelevant outside of online tournaments. After all, why waste a turn improving your stats when you can deal 70% damage with a single hit anyway? It doesn't matter if you buff your stats or not, it will still take 2 attacks to defeat your opponent. But that's only true if you keep using your overleveled Pokémon dealing super effective damage all the time. If you follow some of my previous rules, like resting your Pokémon to avoid overleveling, limiting the number of super effective moves you use, or limiting the number of attack abilities and thereby potentially running out of power points for attacks, then you might find that stat improvements, status conditions, and some of the special abilities are actually quite useful. And finally, tip number 12, just enjoy the game. If you want to hunt shinies, complete the National Dex, or just be overpowered and do super effective damage all the time, then go ahead. It's your game, it's your experience, make the best out of it. So there you go, those were my recommendations to improve your experience playing Pokemon games. I do personally use most of these rules every single time I play, and if you have any other ideas, make sure to leave a comment down below. So thank you guys for watching, hope you guys liked this video. It was a little bit different from what I normally have on my channel, but I hope you guys liked it, and if you did, please consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys next time.